other one, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
Skip to the timestamp on screen if you don't want to watch the introduction and just want the strict instructional portion. So, you're a Transformers collector. You want to expand your lineup with some weird and wacky figures. Some things outside the standard mainline releases. Maybe you want an obscure redeco that ties into another popular franchise. Or maybe you want to back collect something that's long out of print. Perhaps you want to support a haslab project, a wonderful recreation of a childhood classic. Something that you feel you need in your very soul. There's just one problem. Yeah, living anywhere that isn't here, or here can be a bit of a problem at times. Often Hashtag forgets that other markets exist, and decides to skip on other releases. How do you like the look of Legacy United Windblade? Looks awesome, right? Well, if you live in Australia, tough shit. Hasbro just decided to not release her, or Thundertron for that matter. Yes, who would actually want one of the most iconic characters in Cyberverse and IDW? No collectors, right? Or perhaps you do have access to the figure, it's just absurdly expensive to ship it. Want to collect some comics from IDW 2019? Not with those prices, you don't. Hell, some of the sellers don't want to deal with the hassle, so they don't open up international shipping at all. Or maybe the item is sold domestically, they're just taking the piss with the prices they're charging. At the time of upload, HasLab Omega Prime has just been announced, and oh dear lord, that price is god-awful. I get it's 2 Commanders and a Deluxe, but when you're $100 less than Unicron, yeah, this isn't right. I love EB Games, they've been great in helping me build my video game collection, and have always been extremely friendly and polite. But somewhere between Hasbro US and the general consumer, someone has decided to price gouge. There's just nothing else to call it. So I should just give up, right? I've exhausted all my options and have to bite the bullet, I suppose. Well, what if I told you there was another way? What if there was an intermediary service that would provide an overseas address for you to use, then ship directly to you? What if there was a way to get around that pesky geo-blocking, allowing you to expand your access to both new and second-hand Transformers? Introducing the wonderful world of freight forwarding. Originally a brick-and-mortar service that existed primarily for large corporations and immigrants moving all their belongings overseas, with the advent of the internet, it has, in the past couple of decades, opened up to more personal systems. Want to buy something from overseas but weren't able to previously? Well, now you can with the power of freight forwarding. Basically imagine a box. You send a bunch of things to that box, then they wrap all of those boxes up in a bigger box and send it to your own address. Sort of like Big Bad Toy Store's pile of loot, only from multiple sources. This is essentially the easiest way to describe it. In recent months, I've seen a lot of lamenting in regards to not having access to certain figures. With the advent of the new HasLab and the absolute insanity that followed, I wanted to take a moment to explain how freight forwarders work, their benefits and shortcomings, and dispel some of the falsehoods people have that give them animosity to opening an account for one. This video is not sponsored by anyone or in any way, nor will you be seeing any affiliate links from me. I have an affiliate link with the service I use. I am not giving it to you because ultimately it'll be your choice in which freight forwarder you use. The purpose of this video is to inform, not to advertise. So, what are the benefits of actually opening a freight forwarder account? Well, the first, and I'd argue the best boon, is accessibility. I love collecting Transformers, but again, there's typically one big problem I run into. Australia doesn't get everything, it's just a fact of life. Instead of complaining that I don't have access to stuff like this, however, I just find the store that's selling it, use the freight forwarder as the address, and bada bing, bada boom, it's mine! A common criticism I see in regards to this is that it's illegal somehow, which... no. You're legally paying for an item. As long as the store itself doesn't have a policy against it, it's absolutely allowed. Another benefit is sometimes cost. Fact is, not every store has your best intentions at heart. Some of them know you have virtually no other option. Take a look at TF Source, for instance. Look at what they're charging for this. Why would you do this? So I'd ask why you're even using TF Source to begin with, to be honest. It isn't always the case, as I'll get into eventually, but often it's far cheaper to send an international order to a freight forwarder than to ship it directly to you. Going back to Omega Prime for a minute, let's take a look at that $750 price tag and break it down through a freight forwarder. The figure is roughly 250 freedom bucks. Because America is dumb, they calculate the sales tax after the transaction, and it ranges between 2 and 7% roughly. Let's be generous and give a 10% breadth, putting us at 275. Add another 25 for domestic postage, and that puts us at 300. Now let's convert to Aussie dollar dues, which puts us at 465 at the time of scripting this. With 10% GST on the original item, thanks Jerry Harvey, you massive f***. quits, we add another 39. This puts us at roughly 510, rounding up. Even if the postage for the item is $100, you're still saving close to $150. My calculations are probably off, as I'm very bad at maths, but this is being very liberal with the taxation and postage costs. I myself would be going down this route if it weren't for the fact that I'll be in Japan when this figure releases, and it just makes more sense to purchase it from Takaratomi Mall and have it delivered locally. And even if something goes terribly wrong, you're still not supporting the blatant price gouging that happens somewhere between EB and Hasbro Australia. Worst case scenario, it costs roughly the same. I understand the benefit of being able to pay it off at a pace you're comfortable with, but if you are an Australian who has the money up front, from my predictions, it's going to be at least $150 savings to import it, if not more. Shipping cost is also something it can benefit with. This isn't always the case, and there are some benefits to sending something directly, but a lot of the time you look at eBay and realize the figure might as well be geoblocked, even if it isn't explicitly so. As expensive as some freight forwarders are, it can often be cheaper to use it as an intermediary service. This is what my friends end up doing for a lot of their G1 parts. For such small items, the postage costs can occasionally be absurd. Of course, they tend to use my freight forwarding account instead of creating their own, simply because they don't want to deal with the hassle, but honestly, it's really easy. And last but not least, impatience. This isn't something I typically subscribe to, but some people really like getting figures early. Fact is, more often than not, figures come out much earlier in countries like Singapore and Malaysia than they do anywhere else. Doubly so if you live in the country that invented both the halal snack pack and the idea that it's okay to release figures 4 months later, or sometimes not at all. Now, of course, this will be much more expensive than buying things locally, but some people don't want to wait, and I'd be doing a disservice if I were to leave out their spoon. Of course, while there are benefits, there are also downsides to this service. Freight forwarders aren't Tabasco. You can't put this shit on everything and suddenly expect it to be infinitely better. For starters, while freight forwarding can help you save money, it can also get out of hand. Freight forwarders function like that box metaphor I mentioned earlier, but if you only want one thing, that box isn't going to get filled up. There's usually a base price you'll have to pay regardless, like, say, $30. If you're sending one deluxe to the freight forwarder and nothing else, it might be a better idea to ship it directly. Conversely, do be aware of sizes of items. The reason I gave a $100 estimate for Omega Prime is because this is 2 commanders. It's going to be a heavy box, and consequently, it's going to cost a lot to ship it. Still less than the Aussie price, but take these things into account. Sometimes things cost a lot in your country for a reason, and if they aren't actually engaging in price gouging, you may get screwed over. I find freight forwarding works best when you have a bunch of small to medium items consolidated together. Don't worry, they aren't actually going to open your packages. They just lump them all together in a bigger box and ship it your way. Getting together with other collector friends and combining shipments is also a good way to get around this. What do they want? What countries do they want it from? Does the freight forwarder combine multiple countries or only one? Another potential issue is the window in which you can keep things at it for. How freight forwarders work is they give you a set amount of time you're allowed to hold items for, then charge you a late fee for each day after that time is up. A certain time after that, the item gets disposed of. This isn't your parents' house, you can't just leave things here forever and expect them to remain. This is the biggest reason why freight forwarding services typically have abysmal scores on Google. People don't read the terms and conditions, then whine when their items get disposed of. Make sure you have appropriate funds for items and plan out when the orders will get shipped. Be responsible, don't get overwhelmed and realize you have no money to ship the items out. Another thing to keep an eye on is differences in how they calculate prices. Freight forwarders will either charge you based on standard weight or volumetric weight, which is a fancy way of calculating volume. When I started using freight forwarders, I used the now defunct Shopmate, an Australian government-run America-only service. They calculated based on true weight. I now use Buy and Ship, which combines multiple countries together and is much cheaper all things considered. They also use standard weight. Conversely, Com Gateway, which was recommended to me by a friend, uses volumetric weight. Perhaps if your item is extremely heavy but really small, this might be a good option for you. If the stores you're buying from are known to overpack things with packing chips or excessive bubble wrap, you may have to pay extra for the space it takes up. You might also be able to email these services and ask them to compress them for you, but I've never done this, so I assume the answer is no. Another downside is that most freight forwarders won't accept postal addresses. What I've found is they'll only accept home or workplace addresses, not pickup points like Parcel Collect through Australia Post or PO boxes. This is going to be a turn off to a lot of people because not everyone lives in an area where it's safe to leave parcels unattended. It's one of the big reasons my friends use my freight forwarding account and not their own. They live in apartments where tenants think it's perfectly acceptable to steal the mail. Some freight forwarders might not have any issues, but some might. Make sure you do your research. And finally, freight forwarders don't necessarily work for all services. Some stores are happy to oblige while others are staunchly against it. Good news, Hasbro Pulse is fine with it. I've ordered tons of things off them with absolutely no issue. Hell, if it turns out the item item actually releases locally, you can always cancel. Meanwhile, Target US has a policy against it, to the point where they were basically discriminatory with the fact I was a foreigner when I tried to order Red Wing in the Micromaster 10 pack. Walmart is in a weird spot where they allow it, but getting your address changed is a pain in the ass without an American phone number. I still need to fix mine, but I'm not particularly sure how to. I've never had any issues using it with eBay. Long as you pay up front, as services like Afterpay and ZipPay are disabled for international addresses, it'll arrive safe and sound, at least from years of personal experience. Non-F? No problem. Big Bad Toy Store works great, especially with a flat rate shipping. Remember those phone cases they advertised on TFW months ago? Yeah, no problem with those. Army? Nope. Against their terms of service. I've heard people have used them regardless, but don't tempt fate. Singaporean Marketplace Carousel works great, but recently they've changed their terms and conditions to where you need a Singaporean phone number to create an account. In this case, you might need a friend in Singapore to be a liaison for you, organizing the postage to the right service. This might seem a bit counterintuitive. Why wouldn't the friend just ship it to you? Well, perhaps they aren't comfortable. I'm not one to judge. Use the freight forwarder how you like. Send dildos for all I care. Again, do your research and see if the service has any problems shipping to a freight forwarder address. If they don't mention it in the T&Cs, you should be fine, but don't assume it'll work everywhere. So, how do you use them? It's actually really simple. Step 1. Find a freight forwarder suited to your needs. Do your research, ask around, and find one that works for you. Step 2. Find the dedicated address they provide you with. Sometimes they'll have the identification code on the first line of the address where the unit number of an apartment would normally go. Other times it's in the name itself, which is the case with buy and ship. Step 3. Order the item online and copy the address exactly. Even if it doesn't make grammatical sense, make sure it's exact so that the service can appropriately assign your item when it arrives. If all goes well, you move to step 4, registering your item. When you get your tracking number, punch it into the order allocation. Here you'll need to provide the tracking, name of the item, cost of the item, and explanation on whether it has batteries or not. Most Transformers won't have this issue, as not a lot have lights and sound chips outside of the 2000s. And list it for the right price. This is for taxation purposes. Yes, you'll have to pay taxes on importing it. Be responsible. I know friends who deliberately underprice things to avoid paying too much tax, and they genuinely believe they never get caught. Until they were and got fined for it. Be responsible, pay your taxes. If you really don't want to, push for changes in legislation. Now, what if the item doesn't have tracking? Well, you'll just have to wait for it to show up. You get a notification you have an unclaimed item and you'll have to register it then. How will you know which is which? You won't. It'll be a guessing game unless you match up the tracking with what's on the item order. This is why I recommend you register as soon as you get the tracking. Otherwise, things get out of hand and you have to scroll back through your email, figuring out what's what. This brings us to step 5. The item shows up at the freight forwarder. It's all registered and good to go. Now, as mentioned earlier, freight forwarders will hold your items at a standard rate for a set period of time. Shopmate was 2 months. Buy and ship is 21 days. Don't be an idiot and let this run out, making you pay more and or have your items disposed of. Either time your consolidation plans appropriately or just ship the fucker out. As for recommendations, well, I've already mentioned the one I use. Not an endorsement or anything, it's just the one I'm comfortable with. They have a pretty cheap base rate, but it can go up really quickly if you bring in the heavy shit. They also have one of the shorter holding periods, coming in at 21 days. But I've never had an issue with this. Again, no, you may not have my affiliate code. I don't want to influence anyone watching this just because it's the one I personally use. On the topic of affiliate codes, Buyee also counts as a freight forwarder. No, this video is not sponsored by them, but they are quite good. Pricing is fair and they take a lot of the guesswork out of buying things from Japan. I guess their main shortcomings are their limited scope, only working on designated websites and being limited to just Japan. But that's sometimes all you really want. If you want more information, that toy guy has a more in-depth video covering their system. Now these two I haven't used myself, but they were recommended to me highly by TCCA head admin Jason Murray. He's pretty smart about these sort of things, so know that I trust his word as much as I trust Shadow Striker rallying me for battle.
Gas green we stand!
Shop and ship functions very similarly to buy and ship, only with the benefit of having 1 month storage instead of 21 days. Downside is they only ship to one address, and changing it can be difficult. They also have a high starting price, though it plateaus out a lot smoother. Meanwhile, Com Gateway only works in America, but has the benefit of calculating via volumetric weights. This is somewhat situational, but it may end up being cheaper in the long run. They do charge extra for each parcel added though, something which I haven't particularly seen since the Shopmate days. Again, with these last two, I can't vouch for them personally. A friend of mine can, and has, however, and I trust his word. As such, I'm including them as options. Don't take my word for it though, do your research. Spread out, find other services. Weigh up the benefits and the downsides, see what ships to your country and what doesn't. I'm telling you how to use these services, not which service to use. No doubt you'll find one one that works for you. And that's basically it. Freight forwarders are not difficult to use in the slightest. There's a bunch of info you need to take in at first, but once you've gotten it all figured out, it's basically muscle memory. Just remember, not everything benefits from freight forwarding. Sometimes it's better to just bite the bullet and pay the premium locally, but sometimes you can't do that, and sometimes you shouldn't do that. In those cases, hopefully you know now how to use freight forwarding services. So next time, instead of lamenting the lack of access to that figure you've always wanted, take destiny into your own hands. Use a workaround. Get that EVA convoy. Get that Omega Prime. Get that Windblade. Don't let the people tell you what to do, not even me. Collect the way you want to. Let the shackles be released as you fill your life with inconsequential plastic robots. And yes, of course this method also works with any other collecting line. I just don't know how other stores function, so sorry mates. That's just something you'll have to discover for yourself.